Good morning, class. I hope I am quite audible. Today's class is diabetes mellitus. It's a very important topic, just not as a student, but also as a physician, as a doctor of any specialty. This is one topic you can't do away with. If you are a doctor, this is the most important and most substantial topic. And I hope I'm audible. That's what first thing I would like to ask you all. हाँ. So without losing any time, since it's a very comprehensive topic, no amount of lectures, no number of lectures can actually quantify this topic. This is such an enormous topic, but I would like to touch the salient points and how you're gonna organize your answers in your exams, and you should understand the salient features. That is, we'll try to intend to do. So coming on to the topic, diabetes mellitus. It's a very prevalent disease. It's a lifelong chronic disease, as you all know, and because of the group of metabolic disorder where there is a basic hyperglycemia in the blood. That's hyperglycemia means high level of sugar, and it can be due to only two reasons can be there. It is either a deficiency of insulin or the resistance to insulin, or it can be both. And there are multiplexity of for this. We'll talk about it later. And basically, you should know that insulin is secreted by beta cells of the pancreas, and the certain subtle signs are blurry visions, excessive thirst, fatigability, frequent urination, hunger, weight loss. These are some of the symptoms. This is how the patient manifests to you. A definition of a diabetes and diagnosis is very important. Defining a diabetes is very important. Apart from the clinical features, you have certain salient test, blood sugar test, which denotes how to define diabetes. Diabetes describes a group of metabolic disorder, and it's glycemia in the absence of treatment, and they are heterogeneous etiology. I mean, the diversity of diabetes is in its variability in etiology, in its variability in classification, its variability of presentation of the patient. That's why we have defined a diagnostic point, because it's even the treatment part is also variable. Even the presentation in the control in the different individuals are variable. It can be even defined by the genetic and ethnicity and racial predispositions and build predispositions. So this is it's a very wide range of basically a plethora of symptoms and presentation and classification. So that's why it's a heterogeneous etiology, which includes defects in the insulin secretion or action, that is insulin resistance, or both, and that will lead to disturbance of carbohydrates, fat, and protein metabolism. It have a long-term complications, macrovascular and microvascular. The microvasculars were like retinopathy, nephropathy, and neuropathy, to name a few, and macrovascular are peripheral arterial diseases and cerebrovascular diseases, cataract, erectile dysfunction, and even non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So this is the diagnostic criteria. We'll come again to this diagnosis when we talk about the treatment part. Four things you should remember. First thing, measurement of fasting plasma glucose level. Then 2 hours post-load plasma glucose after a 75-gram oral glucose tolerance test. Then there is something called glycosylated hemoglobin, that is HbA1c level. And the fourth one is a random blood glucose in the presence of signs and symptoms of diabetes. So this is any patient with a fasting plasma glucose value of greater than 7 millimole per liter or 126 milligram per deciliter per se is diabetes. Any 2 hour post plasma glucose, always remember this is a post load plasma glucose as per the WHO criteria. After a loading of 75 gram of glucose, you test 2 hours after the loading of 75 gram of glucose. You test for the plasma sugar level, and if it comes more than 11.1 millimole per liter or 200 milligram per deciliter, it is diabetes per se. And if there is an HbA1c greater than 6.5% or a random blood glucose level greater than 200 milligram in the presence and signs and symptoms, are considered to have diabetes. Always remember the dictum, as pragmatic as it is, you should always reascertain the test, you should always repeat the test to confirm the diagnosis of diabetes. So this is a small graphical presentation. As you can see, this is a person with fasting sugar plasma glucose level is around 100 to 110, and then postprandial is between 100 to 140, and this is a normal one. And this is called IFG, that is impaired fasting glucose level. Impaired glucose level is where the fasting blood sugar is more than 110 to 126, or maybe some of the literature have put it down to 105 to 126 fasting blood sugar level. And then the postprandial blood sugar level, this is the postprandial blood sugar level. This is impaired fasting blood sugar level, and the postprandial is between 100 to 140, and this is impaired glucose tolerance level, that is analogous to pre-diabetes, where you have fasting blood sugar level in between 110 to 126 and postprandial blood sugar level 140 to 200. And this is full-blown diabetes with fasting blood sugar level greater than 126 and postprandial blood sugar level greater than 200. So epidemiology, talking about this massive disease with a massive representation, the epidemiology and the global burden of the diabetes is found in every population in the world, in all the regions, irrespective of caste, color, religion, everything, and it includes rural parts of low and middle income countries. This is a worldwide representation, and you can see the burden at a glance, and how by 2040 the world we're going to witness 642 million of cases of diabetes, that the global prevalence will be as equal to 10.4%. The 10.4% of the world population will be under the influence of diabetes. And amongst the top 10 countries with diabetes, India stands at the position 2, just after China. That just shows the enormity and the kind of we can say a pandemic. This diabetes, this chronic pandemicity, this diabetes has been in India. And you see the basic trend of diabetes in India. In 2032 millions, and by 25 you will be 69.9 millions, and by 2030 you will have 80 millions. So as per the Indian Council of Medical Research on Indian Diabetes Study, India has currently 63 million people with diabetes, and as you have seen in the diagram, it's only second largest after China. and out of those majority, as usually, is mostly 90%, more than 90% are type 2 diabetes. And this is a very important slide. We're talking about the classification of diabetes. Diabetes can be, it has a just as the etiopathogenesis, it has mediates of classification. All the previous classification has been done away with. We have a new classification system which has been broadly recommended by WHO and been laid down in 2019. So basically, while framing the classification, we needed to keep three major points in mind. That's one, that's to guide clinical care decision, then stimulate research in the etiology, and provide a basis for the epidemiological studies. So first classification, as the first one, is type 1 diabetes, where you have absolute insulin deficiency because of beta cell destruction. And it one thing which was a cliche, or which was understood, that type 1 diabetes is always immune mediated. It's not like that. So it is immune mediated as well as idiopathic. Then type 2 diabetes, which ranges from predominantly insulin resistance with relative insulin deficiency to predominantly secretory defect with insulin resistance. Then you have other specific types. These are certain genetic defects in the beta cell function, and mostly, as you can see, that MODY stands for mature onset diabetes of the young. These are the young people who are non-insulin dependent, or they might require insulin, but they are mostly analogous to type 2 diabetes, but because of certain mutation and defects in the chromosomal and the genetic aspects on the chromosome, so they have been classified as chromosome 12. One is hepatocyte nuclear factor 1 alpha MODY, that is comes in the MODY type 3. These all are the several types. You might know, it might not necessary for you to remember all this, but you should know there is something called genetic defects in the B cell functions, MODY type. Then there's something important is glucokinase, chromosome 7 defect, and the third one is chromosome 20, that is HNF4 alpha. These three you have. First three is very important for you to remember. Rest of the thing, even if you don't remember, that's all right, because first three represents the major of the crux of this genetic defects beta cell functions. We'll talk about it the later slides. Then the genetic defects in the insulin action, that is a type A insulin resistance. This is especially more common in young women, this type A insulin resistance, or patient with PCOD or obese patient. This is more common, but not necessarily. There is another type in this which are not non-obese patients. Then you have something called leprechaunism. This is one of the genetic defects in the insulin action, where that is more related to the insulin resistant. And there's something called Rabson-Mendelian syndrome, the lipoatrophic diabetes. These all things are just of the namesake. Then you have disease of the exocrine pancreas. Exocrine pancreas, that is the pancreatic cells which has Langerhans cells or interstitial cells, which are responsible for beta cell, which is made up of beta cell, which are responsible for insulin secretions. So when this exocrine function, exocrine pancreas, this is the endocrine function of the exocrine pancreas, and when there is a destruction of the pancreas, it is said that overt diabetes in post pancreatic damage is manifested only after 80 to 90% of the beta cell has been damaged. So this can be as a sequelae to chronic pancreatitis, even an acute pancreatitis, which can be a transient, but the chronic pancreatitis where you have destruction of the beta cell and can lead to patient needing insulin. Then you have trauma or a pancreatectomy for pancreatic cancer, or any neoplasia, then certain cystic fibrosis or hemochromatosis. These all or fibrocalcinous pancreatopathy. These all are because of the destruction of the exocrine pancreas. Then you have certain endocrinopathies, that's acromegaly, Cushing syndrome, glucogonoma, pheochromocytoma, hyperthyroidism, somatostatinum. The one common nerve for all these syndromes is that they all have secretion of hormone which is antagonist to insulin, which basically work in opposition to the action of insulin, and that is how they are responsible for the hyperglycemia. Then there is another entity which has been classified separately, that is a drug induced. Drug induced, you have a glucocorticoid, as you all know, pentamidine, nicotinic acid, diazoxide, then beta hydrogenic agonist, thiazides, and alpha interferon. These are supposed to cause abnormal blood sugar levels and even leads to diabetes. Then infection, certain infections, the viral infection, these infections, this congenital rubella and cytomegalovirus, these are also have been found to cause diabetes mellitus. Something, there is one entity called fulminant diabetes, which happens immediately after the viral infection. So there is this fulminant diabetes. This is more common in viral infections, and that can lead to pancreatic damage, and that can eventually lead to insulin dependent diabetes. Then these are certain of the uncommon form of immune mediated diabetes. There's a stiff man syndrome, is as the name suggests, there is a spasticity of the back muscles and the axial muscles. And the one important thing about the stiff man syndrome, these patients have this JAD antibodies. This is glutamic decarboxylase antibodies, which are a part of type 1 insulin, type 1 diabetes. So this syndrome, they have enormous anti-GAD antibodies in their plasma, and but they are not necessarily insulin dependent, and along with that there is the axial muscle spasm. So this is one of the immune mediated diabetes, stiff man syndrome, then the anti-insulin receptor antibodies. Then other genetic syndromes are Downs, Klinefelters, Turner's, Wolfram's, Friedreich's ataxia, Huntington's chorea. These all have association with diabetes. Then there's a very important entity, that is gestational diabetes. Again, the gestational diabetes, these diabetes are basically because of increased antagonistic hormones like progesterone and secretion of antagonistic hormone by the placenta, human chorionic hormone, HCG hormones, and all that. They are basically responsible for abnormal blood sugar level in such patients. So not necessarily all the gestational diabetes mellitus eventually turn into diabetes in their later in their life. So this is how usually this is a basically normal blood glucose homeostasis, where you keep the blood sugar level around 70 to 110. If there is a low blood glucose level less than 70, you will have a pancreas having islet cells. A Langerhans has cells, and it secretes it has different 80% of the Langerhans islet cells are made up of beta cells. Then you have some alpha cells as well as delta cells. So these beta alpha cells secretes glucagon when the blood sugar level decreases, and it secretes beta, and the beta cell secretes insulin when the blood sugar level is high. So so what usually the threshold for the secretion of insulin, the blood sugar threshold is 70 for the secretion of insulin, and as insulin is secreted, there is a subsequent secretion of glucagon. Corner. So what happens? So as the blood sugar level goes down, the glucagon secretes, and liver is gonna convert glycogen to glucose. So it will cause glycogenolysis, and it will try to compensate for the decreased blood sugar level by secreting blood sugar in by secreting glucose in the blood through glycogenolysis of the stored glycogen, lysis of the stored glycogen into glucose, and whereas with the as the insulin, what does the insulin does? It it will cause the muscles uptake, glucose uptake by the muscles and liver and the fat cells, and that will in the liver it will convert glucose to glycogen, fats and protein, and it will help muscles to take up the glucose for their energy expansion. What actually insulin does? The insulin is, as you know, is a polypeptide. It is a dipeptide which has been linked by the sulfide. It's been linked by the sulfide bond, and it's a dipeptide, a heteromer dipeptide, and its action is basically as a metabolism of carbohydrates, fats, and protein. These are the mostly the insulin responsive cells. These are striated muscles, adipose tissue, and liver. So its action on the fat is to increase glucose uptake, increase lipogenesis, and decrease lipolysis. In the liver, it causes decreased gluconeogenesis, increased glycogen synthesis, and increased lipogenesis. And in striated muscle, again it increases glucose uptake, glycogen synthesis, and protein synthesis. So this is a basic action of insulin. That's how it helps to coordinate the blood sugar level and the metabolism of carbohydrates, fat, and protein in the body. So that's why it has been called as anabolic hormone. The insulin basically supposed to be an anabolic. So we'll like to elaborate on that. What happens during immediately after a meal? So digestion will breaks carbohydrates down into sugar molecules, whether you take food in the form of a complex carb or all the polymer or polysaccharides. These will be converted into sugar molecules and then proteins into amino acids. See, these what I want to stress, both glucose as well as amino acids are the stimulant for insulin secretion. So you will see that right after the meal, the glucose and amino acids enters the bloodstream and the blood glucose level rises sharply. So as the rise in blood glucose level signals important cells in the pancreas, beta cells, to secrete insulin. So within 10 to 20 minutes after a meal, the insulin rises to its peak level, and as you will recollect from your physiology, that insulin has a biphasic secretion. So it's been secreted in spurts in the first 10 to 20 minutes, and then it is being secreted later on, usually 1.5 or 2 hours later on, and it is again secreted in continuous small spurts. So the first phase of the secretion of insulin is mostly important from the preventive point of view as well as therapeutic point of view. Then the insulin will enables glucose to enter the cells in the body, especially the insulin through the insulin receptors on the muscles, liver cells, and the fat cells. And how it receptor acts, it will going to on the liver cells, it will the insulin will causes GLUT2, that is glucose transporting receptors, GLUT2, to go to the cell membrane surface, and in muscles and fat it will be responsible for GLUT4 to be represented on the cell membrane surface, so that the glucose is being taken up by the cell through the facilitative diffusion, through by binding to GLUT2 and GLUT4. GLUT4 on liver, on muscles and fats, and GLUT2 on liver cells. It will help glucose, that is called facilitative diffusion, not will help transfer the glucose inside the cell, and then the glucokinase will phosphorylate that glucose. So as the glucose is phosphorylated, and then it enters the glycolysis. So what happens as it enters the glycolysis, I'll show you in the picture next time, in the next slide. So when the insulin levels are high, the liver stops producing glucose and it stores it in the other forms until the body needs it again. That is glycogenesis. So this is GLUT2, the glucose and the insulin. What it does, it causes manifestation of GLUT2 on the cell membrane, and the glucose is being uptaken, and through the glucokinase it is phosphorylates, and it enters the what it does, it enters the Krebs cycle and generates the ATP, and ATP will go and inhibit potassium channel. There is a ATP sensitive potassium channel, and it has two binding sites, one for sulfonyl ureas and the other for the one for sulfonyl urea, where it comes and block this channel. So as this potassium is inhibited, this channel is inhibited, so what happens, there will be difference in ion concentration inside and outside the cell, and that will lead to depolarization, and with depolarization there will be calcium influx, and as the calcium is enters the cell, it causes the secretory granules, insulin, which are stored, secretory granules which stores insulin. So the influx of calcium will cause exocytosis of the insulin, and this will cause surge insulin, spurt of insulin, and insulin will be secreted into the blood plasma. So this is how it represents the phase of insulin. This is the first 10 to 20 minutes. It will be sudden, as because of the increase in blood sugar, there will be rapid surge of insulin, and then there will be a delayed and a continuous small spurts beginning around 20 to 30 minutes later, and it can continue up to 2 to 3 hours. So type 1 diabetes, talking about type 1 diabetes is again insulin dependent diabetes, this or juvenile onset diabetes, but these terms are of historical importance. It is basically because of the immune destruction of the pancreatic beta cells, and it's mostly represented in the childhood. You will find younger patients with type 1 diabetes, but if you go by the stats, 84% of the people are living with type 1 diabetes are adults, and overall the prevalence of type 1 diabetes is 5 to 10% of all the cases of diabetes. And as both the diabetes, it has a definite autoimmune and genetic factor as well as environmental factor so there is always a genetic predisposition that is usually on the HLA linked genes. That HLA stands for histocompatibility factor, and on chromosome 6 you have DRQ3 or DRQ4 gene locus, where you will have certain defects or mutation. That is the genetic predisposition, and that's why usually it has been found in the twins, the monozygotic twins. You have a concordance of around 40 to 50% relative chances of diabetes in both the twins. So as there is a genetic predisposition, and with the immune response that could be due to several causes, or the viral triggering factor of a viral infection, or altered immune response to altered beta cells, and there will be autoimmune attack, and that will be T cell mediated attack, and as the what is something called auto tolerance is broken down, and the T cell will attack the auto antigen, mostly the beta cell, and it will lead to the beta cell destruction. So it is a cell mediated response, and what importantly is that the mostly the beta cell is get destroyed. The reason behind it is not understood, and that will lead to type 1 diabetes. So what is very important that these 70 to 90% of this type 1 diabetes, they have auto antibodies against glutamic acid decarboxylase. It's very important one, GAT64. These all are islet cell antibodies. Then islets anti-cell antigen 2, then zinc TA transporter or insulin. And these are important from diagnostic point of view, while screening for patient for type 1 diabetes. These antibodies have to be tested in collaboration with the clinical features. These antibodies, it's rule out diabetes, one way of differentiating type 1 diabetes to type 2, and it would also denote the requirement of insulin in diabetic patients. So this is important test even from therapeutic point of view. So 90, 72, but not necessary that all the cases will have. As you can see, only 70 to 90% have these antibodies against these islet cell antibodies. Then the genetic association with DLQ10 and Q8 and DQ2. Then as I said, there is an autoimmune part, but there is also a non-immune or idiopathic, for which the cause is still not ascertained. And then I talked about the fulminant type diabetes, where a very short duration and it is negative for islet cell autoantibodies, and there is no C-peptide secretion. So you wonder what is C-peptide. C-peptide is something which is secreted along with insulin, and it has a better T half than insulin, and it is being secreted along with insulin as a byproduct, and this is also signifies the presence of insulin reserve in the body. So but in case of fulminant type 1 diabetes, you will have no peptide secretion. The body won't have time for virtually for the detection of the C-peptide secretion. So there will be increased serum pancreatic enzymes, and usually there will be frequent flu-like or GIT symptoms, and basically it is because of the cellular infiltration of the macrophages and T cells in the islet cell, and basically due to the accelerated immune response to virus infected islet cell and rapid destruction of beta cells. So this is one part of a fulminant type 1 diabetes which you should know about. All this, that is more than enough. And we'll talk about type 2. In type 2, this is non-insulin dependent, and there is 3 basic features: the disturbance in the insulin reception in the peripheral, that is how it is desensitized, and there may be reduced number of insulin receptors, and there may be a loss of beta cell responses to glucose, leading to slow or reduced insulin secretion by the kidney. As a whole, I just try to highlight that basically type 2 diabetes mostly in patient with metabolic disorders like obesity or inactivity, or with risk factor like smoking, patient with a family history of hypertriglyceridemia, or so these are basically inactive obese patient with physical inadequacy and sedentary lifestyle, and who have a haphazard food habits, even dietary habits. And these patients, what happens, they won't have insulin deficiency, but initially they will have insulin resistance. So the insulin receptors and the insulin responsive cells won't be working adequately or responding adequately to the insulin. So what beta cell does in response to that, it will hyper proliferate and try to increase the insulin manufacture and secretion, and as the insulin quantities increase, as the beta cell worked 12 round the clock and gets exhausted, these hyperinsulinemia state will lead to down regulation of the receptor response to insulin, and so there will be subsequent need for exogenous insulin to be given to the body, and there will be beta cell destruction start taking place and lead to beta cell or hypertrophy, or rather atrophy, and such patient will invariably needing insulin therapy. So this is the cycle in type 2 diabetes in a nutshell. So there is again a strong genetic predisposition. Even it has been seen that the monozygotic twins, they have the chances of transmission or sharing of this diabetes phenotype is up to 60 to 70%, which is more than in what we've seen in type 1. So there is a strong genetic predisposition. You have multiplexability of genetic interplay. Then you have environmental risk factors like obesity, and then peripheral insulin resistance, and there can be a certain deranged insulin secretion as the beta cell worked round the clock to compensate for the increased insulin resistance, and that will lead to hyperglycemia and beta cell exhaustion and manifestation of type 2 diabetes. So this is the diabetes which account for 90 to 95% of the diabetes, and they have a relative insulin deficiency, and usually the patients are overweight and obese, and there are chances they are not obese by BMI criteria, but their body fat might be distributed more along the abdominal region, and that is what called visceral adiposity, and it has a strong connection with diabetes. So even beta cell dysfunction has been observed in thinner people and in the low and middle income group patients in India, and among the people of India descent living in high income countries. So in most people with type 2 diabetes, insulin treatment is not required for survival, but may be required to lower blood glucose level to avoid chronic complications. It's a very important statement. When we come to therapy, we'll try to highlight this point. And since type 2 diabetes, it's the beta cell destruction, it takes some time for the beta cell to get exhausted, so it's remained undiagnosed for many years, and the hyperglycemia might not be severe enough to provoke noticeable symptom as happens in type 1, which can lead to diabetic ketoacidosis in type 1, and only very small percentage of such cases is seen in type 2. So nevertheless, these people are more prone for these developing macrovascular and microvascular complications, especially in young onset type 2 diabetes, which are associated with greater mortality rates. We'll talk about it in the coming slides. Then many factors increase the risk of developing type 2, as I talked about: the age, obesity, unhealthy lifestyle, prior gestational diabetes, and this is the insulin receptor, and how there's a defect, can be defect in the signaling to GLUT4 transporters. Then there's something called gestational diabetes. It's a glucose intolerance which is diagnosed in women during pregnancy, is more frequent in obese and with a female with a family history of diabetes, and it is usually gestational diabetes requires treatment in order to normalize maternal blood glucose levels to avoid complications in the infants. And even after pregnancy, as I talked about, 5 to 10% of the women with gestational diabetes, they are found to have type 2 diabetes, and the conversion rate of women with gestational diabetes to full-blown diabetes can be in developing, especially in developing diabetes, can be up to 20 to 50% chances in the next 5 to 10 years. Then you have something called LADA. We'll talk about LADA because it's a very important entity. It is called latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, It's again a form of a type 1 diabetes diagnosed in individuals who are older than usual age of onset for type 1 diabetes, and it is also called slow onset type 1 diabetes or diabetes type 1.5. Very important, this is very important from MCQ point of view. So LADA is often been mistaken for type 2 diabetes because initially you don't have the insulin requirement, but eventually the patient require insulin within 1 to 1.5 years of the diagnosis. Then you have MODY. MODY, as we talked about, this is the maturity onset diabetes of the young, which is an autosomal dominant mode of inheritance. There can be either these are all the hepatocyte nuclear factor 1A and 4A, or enzyme glucokinase. There will be a defect in these transcription factors, and that will lead to insufficient insulin release from pancreatic beta cells, and which causes MODY. So it is basically non-ketotic hyperglycemia in adults or young patient in conjunction with a family history of diabetes, and the only diagnostic modality is the genetic testing, which have shown that MODY can occur at any age. The glucokinase MODY is one with mutation in the chromosome 7, which leads to defect in glucose phosphorylation and leads to high threshold for glucose stimulated insulin secretion, and results in hyperglycemia, which is often mild and is not associated. It's very important about this, not associated with micro or macrovascular complication, and these patients can be managed solely on diet without any other therapeutic interventions. And this is transcriptor factor MODY, this 1A and 1,4, they are the most common form of MODY, and it will result in marked and major hyperglycemia with high risk of micro and macrovascular complication. And MODY HNF1A, the beauty about this MODY 1A is that it is very responsive to sulfonylureas, and even patient who initially might require insulin may be transferred to sulfonylureas. And this is a MODY type 4. It is a little more severe than MODY type 1, and it is again responsive to sulfonylurea, but eventually it will require insulin. Symptoms of diabetes, very very subtle symptoms such as polydipsia, polyuria, polyphagia, nocturia, fatigability, recent changes of weight, blurring of vision, pruritus fulvi, nausea, vomiting, headache. Patient will have a feeling of discomfort and fatigability. You will see all of these. It's a very myriad of clinical presentation. You just have to all the plethora of symptoms might present at the same time, and you can easily clear cut make out diagnosis of diabetes basically on a clinical presentation. The patient will come with polydipsia. Polydipsia is increased thirst and that is basically because of the increase sugar levels that will lead to increase secretion of sugar through the kidney, through the urine, and that will lead to polyuria, and that will lead to osmotic diuresis, and which might further causes dehydration, intracellular dehydration, and that will lead to with the osmotic diuresis and dehydration will lead to stimulation in the osmoreceptors and signals to the brain, and that will lead to excessive thirst and polydipsia. Then polyphagia, because it's a catabolic state, any deficiency of insulin will be a catabolic state where there will be hyperglycemia. The glucose uptake is also severely impaired. So there's the cellular, on the cellular level, there will be marked catabolic. The cells will be in the catabolic state, and they will be in a state of hunger, and for the energy requirement they will need proteins. There will be proteolysis and lipolysis, breakdown of proteins and breakdown of lipids, and that can lead to ketosis. And the other thing is, as the cell will be in a constant state of hunger, it will the body will tend to eat more, and it will be in a state of hunger because of defect in glucose uptake. Then nocturia is a nighttime frequency of urination that will be increased. Then fertility, as you all know, there can be as there will be lipolysis and proteolysis, muscle wasting, and loss of weight will be subtle, especially in type 1 diabetes. And as there the microvascular symptoms sets in, there can be blurring of vision, and then there will be infection in the private areas, and there can be postprandial bloating and nausea and vomiting sensation because of the increased ketones in the blood, or because of the dehydration or acidosis that can lead to nausea and vomiting. As we'll talk about the acute complication in the later slides, the signs can be, you have to focus on the following areas. The eyes is very important, that is you need to have a regular eye checkup. Any subtle cataract or any changes in visual acuity, they can definitely be a marker for diabetes. Then you will have hands, you can have this cheiroarthropathy or Dupuytren's contracture, which is basically nothing but a loss of mobility of the joint because of thickening of the skin. Then there can be blood pressure, there will be rise in blood pressure, as there will be macrovascular atherosclerosis taking place, and then can be lipodystrophy because of the insulin injection sites, and there will be feeling of dysesthesia and paresthesia in the feet, abnormal sensation and pulses because of the peripheral artery diseases. So all these because of the micro and macrovascular complications. So again, we're talking about the diagnostic criteria. There's a fasting blood sugar more than 126. That the fasting is basically there has been no intake for last 8 hours. In symptom of hyperglycemia and a classical symptoms of polyuria, polytrypsia, unexplained weight loss, and blood sugar random level more than 200, you can label them as diabetes, or any more than 2 hour plasma glucose level more than 200 after loading of 75 gram of glucose dissolved in water. That there is something HbA1c, we are missing out on HbA1c, there is a glycosylated hemoglobin more than 6.5. So importantly, step in clinical subtyping is the first diagnosed case of diabetes. So you have to confirm your diagnosis, and in any symptomatic patient, and then you have to exclude all the secondary causes. You have to look at the age of diagnosis, you have to look at the family history, you have to look at the physical findings and other features of metabolic syndromes, and you have to assess for these acute complications like ketosis and ketoacidosis, which are fatal, and then we have to get certain other diagnostic tests like beta cell autoantibodies and C-peptides for the proper analysis of such patients. So this is basically diabetes in a nutshell. We have talked about the classifications, we talk about the major pathophysiology and the action of insulin. We'll talk about the goal of therapy and all the interventions, treatment, how to take care of the diabetes. We'll talk about it in the next slides, and after that we'll talk about complications, those acute and chronic complications. So I'm trying to recapture the all the salient points in diabetes in as short as possible and as clear as possible, because it's a very vast topic. So our goal will be to eliminate any symptoms related to hyperglycemia and to reduce long-term complications and to allow patient to achieve a normal lifestyle as far as possible. We'll talk about it more when we talk about the therapy. Any questions? Any question so far? Diabetes, this topic will come again and again in our daily routine classes and in our clinical classes. So we should be very clear about the diagnostic and the classification aspect. So I assume you are able to plasma glucose level is high, but what losses? Uh, as I said, the plasma sugar level will be high, but the intracellular hunger will be there, because this plasma glucose, this won't enter the cell, because there will be, that is the problem. This uptake of glucose will be the problem. Because of the insulin deficiency, you won't have those GLUT2 and GLUT4 transporters to take up the plasma glucose into the cell. So the cell will need energy, and they'll get this energy from proteolysis and lipolysis. So glucose will stay in plasma, but it won't be uptaken by the cells. So cell will be in the state of constant hunger, and it will try to bite on protein and lipids. So that is why the patient is in a major catabolic state, and there will be weight loss. You can ask your queries in the next class too. Don't worry, this will take a little longer time to cover diabetes, but because it's a very important topic, so you should be very versed with questions will be updated and will be asked from several aspects of diabetes. Thank you, class.